What's up, everybody? Welcome to Heresy Financial. My name is Joe Brown, and we currently have a supply chain crunch, a supply chain issue globally right now that could actually lead to a major banking crisis. Imagine this. Let's say you have $10,000 to your name. You've got a $10,000 net worth. It's all in cash in the bank, and you've got no debt. Let's say now you want to become aggressive and invest aggressively, so you move that $10,000 into a brokerage account. At the same time, you go open up a credit card. They give you a $10,000 line of credit. You access the whole thing, let's say with a cash advance, and you throw $10,000 more into your brokerage account along with your original $10,000. At this point, your net worth is still $10,000 because you owe $10,000 to your credit card company and you have $20,000 in cash in your brokerage account. Now, let's say you take that $20,000 cash that's in your brokerage account and you purchase a stock. But you don't just purchase a stock with that $20,000. Let's say this is a margin account, and so you leverage your account and you buy $60,000 worth of stock, triple of what your actual account net worth is. Now, at this point, before there's any move, you still have a net worth of $10,000 because you owe $40,000 to your brokerage account with your margin loan. You own $10,000 to your credit card company, and you have $60,000 in your brokerage account invested right now. And so if you sold all that and paid off your debt, you still are left with that $10,000 before. So take a look at this. Net worth of $10,000. But your asset values right now, $60,000. Your balance sheet, $60,000, 6 times more than your net worth. Now, obviously, you see the danger in this scenario right now because if the stock that you've invested in drops by, let's say, 20%, your account value then goes from $60,000 to $48,000. At this point, you have just lost more than your entire net worth. If you liquidated everything, you pay off your margin loan of $40,000 to your broker because you still own that margin loan, you're left with $8,000 left over. That means if you paid all of that towards your credit card company, you still owe $2,000 to your credit card and you've got zero left in the bank. Now, as crazy as it sounds that why would anybody ever get themselves into a situation like this, the fact of the matter is that almost every single bank in Europe is in this exact same position right now. The net worth, the total value of their entire company is worth a fraction of the size of their total balance sheet, all of their investments. With one single thing going wrong that they don't anticipate, it could in a moment, in an instant, bring down the value of their balance sheet far greater than their entire company is actually worth. You say, okay, well, what one thing could make that happen? And yes, it's something that's happening right now, and it's the supply chain disaster, the shipping container shortage that's happening all around the world right now. So you might ask, how can a shipping container shortage cause globally systemically important banks to collapse? Well, that's what I'm here to answer. Ready? Let's dive in. A big shout out in this video to Alistair McLeod. This is stuff that he has been talking about and documenting and writing and speaking about for months now. And you can find most of his great work on goldmoney.com. He's got all of his investing insights. Usually comes out every Thursday. So he's been documenting the problems, especially with the European banks for a while now, and talking about how this recent supply chain crunch and the global shipping container shortage could actually contribute to a collapse here. Now, it's funny because there's almost nobody talking about the current supply chain disaster that's brewing all around the world right now, but it's been happening now for a couple of weeks and it has not been slowing down. So we all remember when the coronavirus panic really set in late February, early March, and markets started to fall apart. There were big supply chain issues. And obviously that makes sense, right? A lot of the world's stuff comes out of China. And so when they shut down and then other countries have to shut down certain parts of their economy, you can see how there would be an issue with getting the containers to the right places around the world. This led to supply shortages of many goods that people expected to have, and it also then led to cost spikes for those things where, there weren't enough of them to go around. Well, the problem is we never really sorted a lot of that stuff out, and there have been lasting issues that are starting to pile up again as we speak. Right now, if you do a little bit of research on the supply chain issue and the container shortage, what you'll find is that there are a lot of shipping containers that are just being shipped back to China empty right now. Now you might think, well, that's not really a problem, with the trade deficit that has been happening for a long time, that China ships a lot of stuff, all these containers come over on the boats to the States and they're full, they unload all their stuff, and then they get shipped back empty. We're simply not selling the same amount of stuff to other countries as we are buying from them. And that is true, but the problem is way more intense right now than it normally is. It's getting to the point where a lot of manufacturers and a lot of vendors and a lot of companies all around the world, they're reserving these containers and they keep on getting bumped and rolled, and containers are they're getting shipped, they're getting, when they are getting shipped, they're getting emptied, and immediately they're getting sent back with no chance to get refilled. And so you have certain areas where the containers are piling up, and then other areas where there's just a complete shortage and no access to containers whatsoever. And containers are the lifeblood of the global supply chains of logistics of shipping. That's what everything makes it around the world in. Now, one problem that is very apparent with this is that stuff isn't getting where it needs to go. So when you talk about raw materials aren't getting sent over to, enough raw materials aren't getting sent over to manufacturers. That those manufacturers then can't make enough stuff that they need to sell to the the wholesalers, and then the wholesalers don't have what they need to sell to the retailers. And so obviously that part of the problem is very apparent, and that leads to supply shocks of the final products, which leads to obviously cost spikes. And we saw that very acutely March and April. But the other side to this problem is really what a supply chain is in reverse, because a supply chain in reverse is a payment chain. And so if raw materials have to make it to a manufacturer, and then the manufactured goods have to make it to wholesalers, and then wholesalers have to make it to retailers, and then to the final person, well, then in reverse, that is a payment chain where all of these companies are paying the company that, they got the stuff from. And if stuff isn't going this way, that means payments aren't going this way. So why is that a problem? Well, in today's economic environment, in the fiat world that we live in, everything is financed. Everything is done through credit, loans, and debt. This means that banking and financing and loans and debts and servicing those payments is integrated 100% into the supply chain through that payment chain, the supply chain in reverse. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Remember the example I gave at the beginning about the person who used a credit card and margin to load upon a stock? Well, you might have, if you were listening to that, you might have thought, hey, well, that could go bad, but that could also go really well, right? Because if the stock goes up instead of going down, then that means that all that leverage contributes to massive gains for that person, right? Well, here's the worst part. Banks aren't leveraged up like that. Banks aren't designed like that. And clearly because that exposes massive risks in one direction, right? And so the way that banks' balance sheets are geared and invested is to have offsetting investments. You'll buy one thing and then you'll sell short another thing. Now, when you sell short one thing, that brings in income, and then when you buy something else, you pay for it. And so they're going to sell one thing and buy another thing that are very, very similar in performance, that 99.99% of the time should increase in value together and decrease in value together. But when they enter into the transaction, they're doing it at slightly different prices. This would be similar to you buying VOO, that's the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, and then shorting SPY, which is the Spider S&P 500 ETF. Now, 999 times out of 1,000, those are going to move in the exact same direction, whether up or down, because they're invested in the same thing. But you might be looking at this and thinking, hey, well, there's a very slight discrepancy here between the expense ratios. And so if there are fund flows from one to another, or I can nail this at the exact time when there's a difference in net asset value on both, you capture maybe a few pennies in difference in the net asset value of each. And all you have to do then is hold until those prices converge, and then you can close out. So banks aren't doing this with stocks and with S&P 500 ETFs. They're doing this with debt instruments like treasuries, and they're doing this with currencies. And this is where the real problem lies, because their entire balance sheet is invested, highly leveraged in investments that are offsetting. And so the gain potential is very, 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 very small. Now, the trade-off to having a very, very, very small gain potential is that it's virtually guaranteed. But that's where the problem comes in. It's virtually guaranteed. It's not actually guaranteed. So they're levered up to massive multiples of their entire company's actual value in these guaranteed bets. banks that produce very little income. And so when something starts to go wrong with these banks, and let's say they have to start unwinding some of these bets, well, now you're producing the opposite pressure on these investments that you actually want to happen. Going back to the stock analogy, if you are long VOO and you are short SPY, to get out of that trade, you actually have to sell VOO and buy SPY. Now, if your position is big enough in that, you could actually move the prices of each of these just by getting out of your trade. And since this problem doesn't just exist with one or two banks, but it exists with almost all European banks, and most of them are considered globally systemically important banks, now you start to see the heart of the issue here. All right, so what are the potential consequences of this? Number one, we're very likely to see some actual supply crunches where the end products aren't there. And so you're likely to see your store not having goods in stock. You're likely to see you go to order something online and the shipping won't happen for, a month or 2 months, and there'll be massive delays on some products. This could also very likely lead to big price increases in these items, especially secondhand if they're being resold. So that is one very likely outcome, and honestly would probably be kind of the best case scenario outcome to this current supply chain disaster that's unfolding right now. Now, the second scenario, like I detailed, where it would lead to actual banking crisis, where we have banks starting to fall and fold, you start to see a nationalization of these banks. You start to see the central banks really absorb and buy all these bad assets off the balance sheets and really absorb ownership of more and more and more of the credit markets and banking. Now, I think throughout the last year, we've seen policymakers really prove to us that they wouldn't allow just banks to fail, and they wouldn't allow these things to completely collapse. So I wouldn't anticipate that this leads to something like a big stock market crash, a 50, 60, 70% stock market crash, or even retesting where we hit in March. I would anticipate something like this leads to a little bit of a flight to safety, a little bit of money fleeing banks, a little bit of money going into typical safe harbor assets, more money going into gold and silver, potentially Bitcoin as well. It probably won't lead to a complete financial system meltdown and collapse, but given the environment we're in today, that option, I guess, is always on the table. So at the very least, now you know if you're shopping last minute for Christmas gifts and you are not able to find what you need, or you order something online, it says it's not coming in and they don't know when it will ship, at least now you know why. Because quite frankly, I don't know why nobody else is talking about this. But it's happening right before our eyes, so stay vigilant. And by the way, if you need a Christmas gift idea for somebody who is somewhat financially literate and you want something that doesn't need to take time to ship, my courses and my guides are all on sale through the end of the year here, 25% off with promo code GIFT2020. Got my courses and guides linked in the description below. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you for watching and have a great day.